Hello friends, today we are going to see how to set up IAM OIDC Provider in Google Cloud Platform. What we are going to do is we are going to set up an OIDC provider in GCP so that we can authenticate our GitHub Actions from GitHub repository that we are going to create and authenticate that repository calls so that whenever we execute an action, GitHub action from GitHub to do something in Google Cloud, we can do that without actually creating or hard coding the secrets. So we do not want to create a service account and export the JSON file with the keys and everything and check it that in the repository. We do not want to do that. What we want to do is we want to create an OIDC provider so that we can actually authenticate from GitHub Actions to our GCP project without exposing our secret keys for the service account. And that way, if ever something goes wrong, you will be safe because your keys are not exposed and you can always change things without affecting many of your code base. So let's go ahead and do that. So the very first thing we want to do is we want to create a new project. So let's go ahead and create a brand new project. And this is so in case if we want to get rid of the project and everything that we did, we just delete the project and everything will be gone. So let's go ahead and create a project. I'm gonna name it IAM OIDC Provider Demo. You can name it whatever you want. And let's select the project. And we are in the project. Let's go to the dashboard and verify that this is brand new project. There is nothing going on here. Let's go to VPCs and you should see that we only have I'm gonna enable the compute engine API so we can see that this is a brand new project. You can see that, and we are gonna verify that we only have default VPC, nothing more than that. Okay, now the API is enabled, so let's go back and look at the VPC, and you can see that we only have default VPC with 37 subnets that comes out of the box. So let's go ahead and enable some of the APIs that we are going to need. So let's go to APIs and service, enable. Let's go to APIs and services, enable APIs and services, and we are gonna say identity and access management API is one we want to enable. Next, we want to enable Cloud Resource Manager API. After that, we want to enable Security Token Service API. And just make sure and verify that Compute Engine API is also enabled, because we are going to create a VPC and that requires this particular API to be enabled. So all our APIs are enabled. So let's go ahead and look at the code and see how our code looks like. Okay, so let's look at the code. Code is pretty simple. what we are doing is we have done is we have created a Terraform template. This Terraform template creates a network, a VPC network, with the name called My Awesome VPC Network, and it will create 2 subnets. It will not create all the 37 subnets. We do not need them. This is just because we just want to execute a Terraform template. This is right, wrong, this is probably whatever it is, but that's not the intention. Our intention is to make sure that we can invoke a Terraform apply. We can invoke Terraform apply, and that should create a Terraform. That Terraform template should create a VPC and few subnets. Now this Terraform template can do anything you want, so go ahead and whatever you want to do with this Terraform, you can do that, but for now we are gonna keep this simple. So this is the Terraform template. This is the provider that we have set up. It's a Google provider and nothing else in here. And this is the variable file. So it has 4 variables, and there is a variable, there is a file called terraform.tfvars. These are the values for those variables. So we are saying that the project ID is this, and this is what the region is. So I'm going to change the project ID from what is there right now to what we are using right now. And our region is fine. We don't really care. So that is the Terraform setup. Next thing, which is more important, is our GitHub Actions, right? So the GitHub Actions, you can find them in .github/workflows. That's the folder. In there you can find those GitHub Actions. So we have 2 actions. One is to create VPCs. Another one is to list the VPCs and the subnets. And this is how the action file looks like. So we specify the name of our workflow, and then we say that we want to manually execute that workflow. If you want that workflow to get executed every time you check in the code in the main branch, and if you make changes to either the VPC file or the parameter file, if you want that workflow to get executed automatically every time you make changes to them and check them in, then just uncomment this line and then comment out the first line which says workflow_dispatch and uncomment the lines which says push branches main and the paths. So this line number 3 will make that workflow to get executed manually. Line 4 and up to line 9, these lines will execute the workflow automatically. Then we specify some defaults, and we also specify our working directory. So our working directory is Terraform VPC. The permissions, we give them read permissions, and here is our first job. So our job is to deploy dev environment, and these permissions are required for the OIDC token endpoint to interact with the OIDC token endpoint. If you do not specify these permissions, your workflow is most probably not gonna work. Next, we are checking out the code, and then we are using this action, which is a Google GitHub action called auth, means authenticate or authentication, and this is how that action looks like. Now we will come to all these parameters in just a few minutes, so just ignore them right now. And then we are going to echo everything to see what happens or what happened after this particular action, this particular step gets executed. What happens, right? Some environment variables are set and all that stuff, and then the usual Terraform stuff in here, and Terraform plan and Terraform apply. So this is what it looks like. So this will help us interact from our GitHub Actions to our with our GCP account, and help us deploy a Terraform template. The second file, which is a different workflow, which is to list the VPC. Now the first workflow, which is to create the VPC, we are gonna invoke Terraform template. The second workflow is to actually execute a gcloud command. So we are, instead of executing the Terraform workflow, we will just invoke this gcloud compute networks list, and then we are gonna list the subnets of the network that we just created. So that way you can understand the difference between both these. There is a very little difference. There is not much difference, but whatever the difference is, you can see how you can invoke a gcloud command, or how you can integrate Terraform with your GCP. So with that, let's go ahead and set up our GCP project with the OIDC provider. Okay, so let's jump into our GCP console, and let's go ahead and set up our OIDC provider. So the first thing we want to do is we want to go to Identity and Access Management. From there, we will go to Workload Identity Federation. And if you are doing it the first time, you will get this Get Started section. Click on it, and let's go ahead and create our first pull. So we are gonna name this GitHub Actions pull. Leave the ID as is, pull ID, and click on continue. Next thing is we are gonna select the provider. So you get AWS, OIDC, and SAML. If you are trying to integrate your AWS account or your AWS IAM role with GCP, then you will select AWS. In our case, we are going to select OIDC. Provider details, the provider name, you can name whatever you want. We are going to name it GitHub Actions. This is the important part, the issuer URL. This has to be the URL for our GitHub Actions. So that's the URL for the GitHub Actions. We are going to leave the audience default, and we're going to click on continue. Now comes configuring the attributes. So the first attribute that we want to configure is google.subject, and the value for that attribute is going to be assertion.sub. Next, we are going to set up next attribute we are going to set up is attribute.actor, and the mapping is going to be assertion.actor. Next attribute we are going to set up is for audience, attribute.odd, and the mapping is going to be assertion.odd or audience. Now here is the last attribute. The last attribute we are gonna, because we want to restrict this particular provider pool to be associated, or the identities of this provider pool to be restricted with a repository, so that only that particular repository can, so that the actions from that particular repository can only those actions can use this particular identity pool. And we just click on save. Okay, so that is done. Our identity our identity pool is created and our provider is created. So the next thing we are going to create is service account, and we are going to set that service account with the pool that we just created, so that that service account can actually invoke our Terraform template. So the next thing, like I said, we are going to create a service account. So we just go to service accounts and we click on create service account, and we are going to name our service account as GitHub Actions SA. Click on create and continue. Next thing we are going to do is we are going to grant this service account access. Because we are going to create a VPC, so we will do that. Next we click on continue and we click on done. So we created the service account and you can see that it has compute network admin access. Now we are going to set up this particular service account to be part of the workload identity pool that we just created. So in order to do that, we need to first get the workflow identity provider ID, right? That ID is, you can get that particular ID right from here, or what we are going to do is we are actually going to use our CLI command to do that, so that you understand how it can be done using CLI as well. So we are going to create a Cloud Shell and we are gonna paste this command. So this command, what it does is it says gcloud IAM workload identity pools providers describe GitHub Actions. So we are saying that describe this particular provider called GitHub Actions, which you can see here, and it belongs to the workload identity pool called GitHub Actions pool, and the location of that particular GitHub action pool is global. And then we click on enter, and you can see that it is giving us all this information. The information we are interested in is the name, so this is what we want to copy and paste it somewhere so we can use it. Now go ahead and close the Cloud Shell, we don't really need it anymore, and click on the GitHub Actions pool that we just created and copy the IAM principal that is showing up here. So copy that and paste it somewhere. Okay, so now we have our IAM principal and we also have the provider ID and everything. So let's go ahead and click on the service account. Click on the service account that we just created, go to permissions and click on grant access, and in the new principles paste IAM principal that we got from the previous step, and in the service account in the roles type in workload identity user. So we're saying that this particular service account is a user of this particular workload identity pool, and then we click on save. Okay, now the next thing we want to do is we want to update our workflow with the information that we just got. So we will go back to our GitHub workflows files, and what we need to change here is we want to come here on the line number 30, and it says what is your workflow identity provider. This is where we are going to paste the output of the command that we executed a while back. So here we will say this is our workflow identity providers ID. This ID, how did we get this ID? We got this ID by executing this command on our Cloud Shell. So I'm just pasting this command here so you remember that we executed this command a while back in our Cloud Shell. So that's the same command. Next thing we want to update is service account. So which service account are we using here? this service account is, we are gonna go to our GCP console, get the service account, copy that and paste it here. Remove the spaces, doesn't really matter. And this is what we are doing. So we are saying that in this action, we are saying that this is what our workflow identity provider is. Create a credential file. This credential file is not going to contain any sensitive information. Using this particular service account, token format should be access token, and the lifetime of this token is 120 seconds. So you can change it however much you want. I believe the default is 360 seconds, and maximum you can do is 1 hour. So we really don't need it for that long, so that's why I have put in here 120 seconds. But if you need it for a long time, then you just change this particular time frame here. And we are going to make the same change to our other file, and I am going to just copy and paste it. And remember, I told you there is a one subtle difference between using it with G-Cloud versus Terraform, because Terraform expects you to have a credential file when you are working with GCP Provider. G-Cloud does not. It will figure out based on the environment variables how to with the different type of environment variables. So we just comment out this particular line here saying do not create a credential file when you are working only with G-Cloud commands. But if you are working with Terraform, then yes, please go ahead and create this credential file. Rest everything, just leave it as is, and if all this actually works well, then we should be able to see our VPC getting created. So let's go ahead and check in our code. Okay, remember, we did not set up our workflows in such a way that they execute automatically. We have to go and invoke them. So let's go ahead and invoke our workflows in GitHub and see what happens. Okay, so this is what my GitHub repository looks like. I will come to Actions, and you can see I have already done it previously and it all worked. So before we do this, let's go back and verify that we do not have any VPCs. You can see we only have default VPC. We do not have anything else. So hopefully when we invoke this particular workflow called VPC CI dev create, it should create a VPC and some subnets. So let's do that. Let's click on the workflow execution, click on this one, and you can see that it looks like everything is going as planned, and we actually were able to successfully set everything up. So let's see what happened after it executed configure GCP credentials. So when we echo our environment variables, you will see that it actually has set up these environment variables called Google Cloud Project. This is the Google Cloud Project that we are working in. Google Cloud SDK core project. That's probably the same. The important thing here is Google application credentials. So this is where it has put the file. So remember we said, create credential file to true. That is why it created this Google application credentials file, and it has set that file, set up this file in this particular location. And rest everything you can take your time to just see what happened. This is not required, but if you want to, nobody stops you from doing that. And that worked, so that's a good thing. Now let's come here and refresh our VPCs, and you can see that we now have my network VPC, my awesome VPC network. Next thing what we will do is we will invoke our second workflow, which is going to just list our VPC and our subnets. So let's go ahead and do that. And this is doing it by using gcloud SDK, not the Terraform template. And let's go ahead, click on it, see what this execution looks like, and we will examine the echo in just a second when it's done. And it is setting up the gcloud SDK. And you can see that it has all the variables here, more or less the same variables that it did the last time. And when we come here to our list compute networks, that's the command that we are executing in here, displaying networks and displaying subnets. It is showing us the network and it is showing us the subnets that we just created. And that is it for the demo. All the code that you need to run this is in the GitHub repository. So let me know how it goes, and happy coding. Bye bye.